A single dad janitor hummed a gentle lullaby to calm a crying girl in a corporate lobby, unaware that her billionaire mother, watching from 40 floors above, recognized every note of that sacred melody and realized the impossible truth about who this man really was. What started as a simple act of kindness between a maintenance worker and a distressed young girl would unravel a web of missed opportunities, hidden identities, and corporate failures that had kept two broken families apart for years. The lullaby that Kelvin Albright hummed that Tuesday evening wasn't just any song. It was a melody that connected him to the most powerful woman in the building in ways neither of them could have imagined. This is the story of how a forgotten application, a biased hiring system, and a moment of pure human compassion would expose the devastating irony of a company that had rejected the exact person they desperately needed, while he worked just floors below, invisible to everyone except the one person who mattered most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The polished granite floors of Aurora Tower's 58th floor lobby felt like ice beneath 9-year-old Saffron Hayes' legs as she sat curled against the floor-to-ceiling windows, her small frame shaking with silent sobs. The late evening sun cast long shadows across the space where Sterling Dynamics conducted its most important business deals. But none of the executives hurrying past with their briefcases and urgent phone calls seemed to notice the young girl. Falling apart in plain sight, Saffron pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to calm the crushing weight that had settled in her chest like a stone. The breathing exercises Dr. Morrison had taught her weren't working anymore. Nothing was working anymore. The familiar panic was rising again, making her heart race and her vision blur as the world around her seemed to spin out of control. Below, her Meridian city stretched endlessly in all directions, a maze of glittering lights and busy streets where normal families were probably sitting down to dinner together, where other kids her age were playing games or watching movies, instead of waiting alone in corporate lobbies while their mothers conquered the business world one acquisition at a time. The Sterling Dynamics lobby had become her second home over the past 2 years, ever since the divorce finalized and her father moved to Seattle for his new job. Her mother, Elora Sterling, CEO and founder of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the Pacific Northwest, had promised that things would get easier once they settled into their new routine. But easier had never come. Instead, Saffron's life had become a carefully orchestrated performance of perfection that left no room for the simple comfort of being understood. The other executives walked past her with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to navigate around obstacles without truly seeing them. Their conversations filled the air with words like market penetration and quarterly projections, creating a soundtrack of success that somehow made Saffron feel more invisible than ever. She had become part of the furniture in this place, a small, sad fixture that everyone had grown accustomed to stepping around. Her backpack sat beside her, heavy with homework from Meridian Preparatory Academy, the exclusive private school where every student was expected to excel in multiple languages, advanced mathematics, and competitive academic programs that would prepare them for Ivy League universities. The violin case leaning against the window contained the instrument she was supposed to be practicing for her recital next month, though the thought of performing in front of hundreds of people made the panic surge even stronger. Tonight's breakdown had started during her after-school Mandarin tutoring session with Mrs. Chun, when she couldn't remember the tones for words she'd practiced 100 times. The disappointment in her tutor's eyes had triggered something deep and painful, a fear of failure that seemed to grow stronger every day despite all the resources her mother provided to help her succeed. The tears came harder now, hot and desperate, against her cheeks as she realized that no one was coming to check on her. Her mother's assistant had already called twice to say that the board meeting was running late, that Saffron should do her homework and wait patiently like always. But patience felt impossible when every breath required conscious effort, and every sound in the lobby seemed amplified to an unbearable volume. The weight of expectation pressed down on her small shoulders like a physical force. Tomorrow there would be another early morning piano lesson before school, followed by advanced chemistry tutoring during lunch, then debate team practice after regular classes ended. Her calendar was packed with opportunities that other kids could only dream of, yet all Saffron dreamed of was a single afternoon when she could just be 9 years old. Without apologizing for not being extraordinary, she had tried to explain the feeling to Dr. Morrison during their weekly sessions, but the words never came out right. How could she tell the child psychologist that she felt like she was drowning in her mother's love? That every gift, every opportunity, every carefully planned experience felt like another weight pulling her underwater? Dr. Morrison would probably just adjust her anxiety medication again and suggest more coping strategies that felt as artificial as everything else in her meticulously managed life. The lobby around her continued its evening ritual of important people doing important things, while Saffron sat forgotten in her corner, struggling to breathe and wondering if this crushing feeling in her chest would ever go away. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like before the divorce, before the move to Meridian City, before her life became a project to be optimized rather than a childhood to be cherished. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, a different girl who had laughed easily and played without purpose and fallen asleep to bedtime stories instead of productivity podcasts. That girl had disappeared somewhere in the transition from family to single-parent success story, leaving behind only this anxious, overwhelmed version who couldn't seem to live up to the potential everyone insisted she possessed. As the sun continued its descent behind the city skyline, casting the Sterling Dynamics lobby in deeper shadows, Saffron Hayes sat alone with her panic and her fears, unaware that her mother was watching from 47 floors above, and completely oblivious to the fact that help was about to arrive. From the most unexpected source imaginable, the gentle humming began as a whisper, so soft that Saffron almost thought she was imagining it. Through her tears, she saw a man in a simple gray maintenance uniform approaching with a cleaning cart, his movements unhurried and deliberate, as he began wiping down the nearby tables and straightening the chairs that had been left askew by the evening's business activities. Kelvin Albright had been working the night shift at Aurora Tower for 18 months, arriving each evening at 6 o'clock to clean the executive floors while the building slowly emptied of its daytime inhabitants. At 42, he possessed the kind of quiet dignity that came from years of honest work and single parenthood, his gentle demeanor hiding depths of experience that his janitorial uniform couldn't begin to suggest. But tonight, something was different. The soft sounds of distress coming from the corner near the windows had caught his attention immediately, triggering instincts that he hadn't used professionally in over 3 years. His trained ear recognized the rapid, shallow breathing of someone in the grip of a panic attack, and every fiber of his being responded to the unmistakable sound of a young person in genuine emotional crisis. "Hey there," Kelvin said softly, his voice carrying the warm, steady tone that had once been his professional trademark. He stopped his cleaning routine and knelt down several feet away from Saffron, careful not to invade her space while making himself available if she needed help. "Sounds like you're having a tough evening." Saffron looked up through her tears, surprised to find kind eyes looking back at her without judgment or impatience. Most adults who noticed her distress either ignored it entirely or offered the kind of hurried comfort that made it clear they had more important places to be. But this man seemed genuinely present, as if helping her was the most natural thing in the world rather than an interruption to his work schedule. I can't breathe right," she managed to whisper, her voice catching on each word as the panic continued to surge through her small frame. "That's okay," Kelvin replied, settling more comfortably on the floor beside his cleaning cart. Breathing can be tricky sometimes. Would it help if we tried something together? I know a song that always helped my daughter when she felt scared or overwhelmed. Without waiting for an answer, Kelvin began to hum a melody that seemed to wrap around Saffron like a gentle embrace. The tune was hauntingly beautiful, with a rhythm that naturally encouraged slower, deeper breathing. It wasn't a song she recognized from the radio or from her music lessons, but something older and more universal, a lullaby that spoke to some deep part of her soul that had been hungry for exactly this kind of comfort. Hush now, my darling, close weary eyes, Kelvin sang softly, his voice rich with warmth and genuine care. Stars in the heavens are dancing tonight. Dreams will come calling like soft summer rain, washing away all your worry and pain. The melody seemed to have an immediate effect on Saffron's nervous system. Her breathing began to slow and deepen as she focused on the gentle rise and fall of the tune. The way each note seemed perfectly placed to create a sense of safety and calm. For the first time in hours, the crushing weight in her chest began to ease. That's beautiful, she whispered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Where did you learn it? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's something my grandmother used to sing to me when I was about your age, Kelvin explained, continuing to hum softly between words. She said it was passed down through our family for generations, a special song for whenever someone needed extra comfort. My daughter Emma used to love it too, especially during thunderstorms or when she had bad dreams. As he spoke, Kelvin pulled a small packet of tissues from his cleaning cart and offered them to Saffron with the same gentle courtesy he might have shown to a visiting dignitary. There was nothing condescending in his manner, no suggestion that her tears were inappropriate or inconvenient. Instead, he treated her emotional crisis with the same respect and attention he would have given to any human being in need of support. Would you like me to teach you the words? He asked, noticing how the melody seemed to be helping her regain her composure. Sometimes it's easier to remember the calm feeling when you have the whole song in your heart. Saffron nodded eagerly, grateful for something to focus on besides the overwhelming anxiety that had been consuming her. As Kelvin patiently repeated the verses, she found herself drawn into the simple beauty of the lullaby, the way it seemed to create a bubble of peace around them, despite the corporate chaos of the lobby. Hush now, my darling, let worries take flight, carried away on the wings of the night. Morning will bring you a fresh, hopeful start. Love will remain in the depths of your heart. The song seemed to work like magic, not because it solved any of Saffron's underlying problems, but because it offered her something she had been desperately missing, the experience of being truly seen and cared for by someone who expected nothing in return. Kelvin's presence felt like a warm blanket on a cold night, protective and comforting without being overwhelming or demanding. As her breathing returned to normal and the panic subsided, Saffron found herself curious about this gentle man who had appeared just when she needed him most. Do you have other songs like that? She asked, her voice stronger now but still soft with lingering vulnerability. Oh, I know quite a few, Kelvin replied with a smile that reached his eyes. Songs for different feelings and different kinds of days. Music has a way of helping us through the hard times, don't you think? For the first time in months, Saffron smiled back, a genuine expression of joy that transformed her entire face. Could you maybe stay for a little while? Until my mom's meeting ends? I'd be honored to, Kelvin said, settling in for what would become an evening that would change both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. 47 floors above the lobby, Elora Sterling stood frozen at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, her breath fogging the pristine glass as she watched a scene that made her heart stop beating. Through the building's sophisticated security system, she had been monitoring the lobby cameras during a brief break in her board meeting, checking on Saffron as she always did when meetings ran late. What she saw defied every assumption she had made about the evening, about her daughter's safety, and about the people who moved invisibly through their building after hours. A maintenance worker was sitting on the lobby floor beside Saffron, and the sound coming through the audio feed made Elora's knees nearly buckle. He was singing her grandmother's lullaby. The exact melody, the precise words, the same gentle cadence. That had been passed down through 5 generations of Sterling women. The song that Elora's great-great-grandmother had brought with her from Ireland, that had comforted Sterling babies through wars and depressions and family tragedies for over a century. Hush now, my darling, close weary eyes. Elora's hand pressed against her throat as the impossible melody continued. Each note perfectly matched to the version her own grandmother had sung to her during childhood summers in County Cork. This wasn't a coincidence or a similar tune. This was their song, their family's most precious inheritance, being offered to her daughter by a stranger who had no conceivable way of knowing its significance. At the board meeting she had left just minutes earlier suddenly felt insignificant compared to the mystery unfolding in her lobby. She had been discussing quarterly projections and market expansion strategies with some of the most powerful investors in the Pacific Northwest. But all of that paled in comparison to watching her daughter's panic attack dissolve under the gentle influence of a man who somehow knew the exact song that had comforted Sterling women for generations. Through the security feed, Elora could see Saffron's transformation with startling clarity. Her daughter's rigid posture was relaxing. Her breathing was becoming steadier, and for the first time in months, genuine peace was replacing the constant anxiety that had become Saffron's default emotional state. The man she could see from his uniform that he was part of the night cleaning crew was treating her daughter with a reverence and patience that made Elora's chest tighten with emotion. Stars in the heavens are dancing tonight. The words hit Elora like physical blows, each syllable carrying the weight of memory and impossible coincidence. She remembered her grandmother's hands braiding her hair while singing this exact verse, remembered falling asleep to these words during the difficult months after her parents' divorce, remembered singing the same melody to Saffron when she was a baby, before life became too complicated for such simple comforts. But how could a maintenance worker know this song? How could someone who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans possess knowledge that belonged exclusively to her family's oral tradition? The lullaby had never been written down, never recorded, never shared outside the intimate circle of Sterling mothers and daughters. Elora's own mother had made her promise to keep it sacred, to pass it on only to her own daughter when the time was right. Yet here was a stranger offering her family's most treasured gift to Saffron in her moment of greatest need, and doing so with the kind of natural grace that suggested deep familiarity with both the song and the art of comforting distressed young people. The way he positioned himself near but not too close, the patience in his voice, the complete focus on Saffron's well-being, everything about his response spoke to professional level understanding of anxiety management. Elora found herself studying the man's face through the security camera, searching for any clue that might explain this impossible situation. He appeared to be in his early 40s, with the kind of weathered dignity that came from years of honest work and life experience. His movements were deliberate and gentle, his attention completely focused on Saffron, as if helping her was the most important task in the world. Morning will bring you a fresh, hopeful start. The final verse of the lullaby brought tears to Elora's eyes as she watched her daughter smile for the first time in weeks. Not the polite, performed smile that Saffron offered to tutors and teachers, but a genuine expression of joy and relief that illuminated her entire face. The transformation was so dramatic that Elora had to grip the window frame to steady herself. This stranger had accomplished in minutes what months of expensive therapy, specialized medications, and carefully planned interventions had failed to achieve. He had reached Saffron not through clinical techniques or behavioral modifications, but through simple human connection and the mysterious gift of a song that Should have been impossible for him to know. The questions multiplied in Elora's mind like wildfire. Who was this man? How did he know their family lullaby? What kind of background did he have that enabled him to respond to Saffron's crisis with such professional competence? Why was someone with obvious experience in anxiety management working as a janitor in her building? But even as the mystery deepened, Elora felt something else stirring in her chest, a profound gratitude mixed with devastating self-awareness. This man had been present for her daughter in a way that she, despite all her resources and authority, had failed to be. He had offered Saffron exactly what she needed most: patient attention, genuine care, and the kind of emotional safety that no amount of money could purchase. The irony was crushing. Elora had built Sterling Dynamics into a billion-dollar empire, partly to ensure that Saffron would never lack for anything. Yet her daughter had found more comfort in 5 minutes with a maintenance worker than in all the advantages wealth could provide. The distance between her corner office and the lobby floor felt infinite, not just physically but emotionally. Through the security feed, she watched as the man continued to engage with Saffron, their conversation too quiet for the audio to capture, but clearly meaningful to both of them. Her daughter was animated now, gesturing as she spoke, her body language completely transformed from the rigid panic of an hour earlier. Elora realized with startling clarity that she was witnessing something sacred. Not just the healing of her daughter's immediate crisis, but a moment of genuine human connection that had been missing from their lives for far too long. This stranger had done more than calm Saffron's anxiety. He had reminded her what it felt like to be truly seen and valued by another human being. As she watched the impossible scene continue to unfold, Elora Sterling began to understand that this evening would mark a turning point in their lives, though she had no idea yet just how profound that transformation would prove to be. Saffron Hayes's days had become a meticulously orchestrated symphony of achievement, each note precisely timed and executed with the kind of perfection that left no room for spontaneity or joy. Her life looked extraordinary on paper: private tutors, exclusive schools, cultural experiences that most young people could only dream of. But beneath the surface of privilege and opportunity lay a weight of expectation that was slowly crushing her spirit. The morning routine began at 6:15 a.m. sharp with Mandarin lessons via video call with Professor Liu, a stern woman from Beijing who corrected Saffron's pronunciation with the precision of a drill sergeant. While most 9-year-olds were still sleeping, Saffron sat at her bedroom desk practicing tones and characters that her mother insisted would give her a competitive advantage in the global marketplace of the future. Breakfast was consumed while reviewing vocabulary flashcards in 3 languages, her organic steel-cut oats growing cold as she struggled to memorize phrases in French and Spanish that she would likely never use in actual conversation. The ride to Meridian Preparatory Academy was spent listening to classical music that supposedly enhanced cognitive development, though to Saffron it felt more like elegant torture, another reminder that even her commute time needed to be optimized for maximum educational benefit. Meridian Preparatory prided itself on creating the next generation of world leaders. But for Saffron, it felt more like an elaborate testing facility where every interaction was evaluated and every performance measured against impossibly high standards. Her days were packed with advanced mathematics that challenged most middle schoolers, literature analysis that would have impressed college freshmen, and science laboratories that required the kind of focus and precision that left her mentally exhausted by lunchtime. But the regular academic pressure was only the beginning. After school came violin lessons with Maestro Petrovsky, a Russian immigrant who demanded perfection in every bowstroke and who had made Saffron cry more times than she could count. His criticism was always constructive, always aimed at improvement, but it felt like a constant reminder that she was never quite good enough, never quite meeting the standards that everyone seemed to expect from Elora Sterling's daughter. French Conversation sessions with Madame Dubois followed the violin torture, conducted entirely in a language that Saffron could understand academically, but couldn't feel emotionally. The conversations were stilted and artificial, focused on topics like international business and cultural diplomacy rather than the simple pleasures and concerns that actually occupied a 9-year-old's mind. Tennis lessons at the exclusive Meridian Country Club came next, where Saffron's serve was analyzed and corrected by a former professional player who seemed incapable of understanding that not every young person possessed the desire to dominate their opponents with ruthless efficiency. The court felt like another stage where her performance was constantly scrutinized, another arena where falling short of excellence was treated as a personal failure rather than a normal part of learning. Coding club, chess team, and academic decathlon rounded out her weekly schedule, leaving precious little time for the kinds of unstructured play that her nervous system desperately craved. Every activity was designed to build character, develop skills, or enhance college applications that were still nearly a decade away. The adults in her life spoke constantly about her potential and her bright future, but Saffron often felt like she was living someone else's life, following a script written by people who had forgotten what it meant to be 9 years old. The panic attacks had started 6 months earlier, beginning as a flutter in her chest during a particularly challenging violin recital. At first, the episodes were manageable, brief moments of overwhelming anxiety that she could hide behind polite smiles and perfect posture. But they had grown progressively worse, striking without warning during Mandarin lessons when she couldn't remember vocabulary words, in the car when the classical music felt too loud and overwhelming, and especially in the Sterling Dynamics lobby where she spent hours each week waiting for her mother's meetings to end. Dr. Morrison, the child psychologist her mother had hired at $300 per session, had diagnosed her with high-functioning anxiety and perfectionist stress disorder. The terminology made Saffron feel like a broken machine that needed fixing rather than a young person who was drowning under the weight of impossible expectations. The therapy sessions themselves had become another appointment to keep, another performance to manage, another adult who spoke about her problems in clinical terms that somehow made her feel more isolated than ever. The medications Dr. Morrison prescribed had helped with some of the physical symptoms, the racing heart, the shallow breathing, the overwhelming sense of doom that could strike without warning, but they couldn't address the fundamental problem. Saffron's life had become so structured, so optimized for success, that there was no space left for the simple human experiences that her soul needed to flourish. She had tried to explain these feelings to her mother during their brief conversations between meetings and business trips, but Elora's solutions always came from the same corporate playbook that had built Sterling Dynamics. Identify the problem, allocate resources, optimize outcomes. More tutoring to reduce academic stress. A color therapist to redesign her bedroom for maximum calm. A nutritionist to ensure her diet supported cognitive function. Everything except the one thing Saffron needed most: her mother's undivided attention and unconditional love. The irony was devastating. In trying to give Saffron every possible advantage, Elora had created a childhood that felt more like a corporate training program than a time for wonder and discovery. The constant focus on achievement and optimization had stripped away the joy and spontaneity that should have characterized these precious years, replacing them with anxiety and a crushing fear of disappointment. Saffron had begun to feel like she was living inside a beautiful cage, surrounded by luxury and opportunity, but unable to experience the simple freedom of being herself without apology or improvement plan. The adults in her life meant well. She understood that intellectually, but their love felt conditional on her performance, their approval dependent on her ability to meet standards that seemed to rise higher with each passing month. Waiting in the Sterling Dynamics lobby had become a metaphor for her entire existence. Sitting quietly, trying to be invisible, hoping not to disappoint anyone with her presence, while yearning for someone to simply see her as she truly was rather than as a project to be perfected. The corporate energy that surrounded her felt electric and important, but it was an energy that seemed to exist in a different world from her own, a world where her mother belonged, but where Saffron herself felt like an unwelcome intruder. Tonight's breakdown had been building for weeks, the pressure accumulating like water behind a dam until something finally gave way. The gentle lullaby that Kelvin had offered felt like the first genuine kindness she had experienced in months, the first moment when an adult had focused entirely on her comfort rather than her improvement. For those precious minutes, she had been allowed to simply exist as a young person who needed care, rather than as a future leader who needed constant preparation for challenges she might never face. As Kelvin Albright continued to comfort Saffron with gentle conversation and occasional verses of the lullaby, anyone observing closely would have noticed something unusual about his approach. His response to her panic attack hadn't been the well-meaning but clumsy intervention of a maintenance worker trying to help. It had been the carefully calibrated response of someone with deep professional experience in anxiety management and trauma response. The way he had positioned himself near, but not too close, respecting her personal space while remaining available for support, reflected sophisticated understanding of how to approach someone in emotional crisis. His voice carried the kind of steady calm that could only come from years of practice managing high-stress situations involving vulnerable individuals. Most telling of all was his immediate recognition of the symptoms and his instinctive knowledge of exactly what interventions would be most effective. "You know," Kelvin said softly as he organized some supplies in his cleaning cart, "I've noticed you here in the lobby quite a few times over the past several months. It seems like you spend a lot of your evenings waiting in this building. The observation was casual but astute, revealing that he had been quietly monitoring the well-being of a young person who appeared to be struggling. Most cleaning staff would have noticed a regular presence without feeling compelled to intervene. But Kelvin had been tracking patterns of distress with the systematic attention of someone trained to identify escalating mental health concerns. "My mom works really late most nights," Saffron explained, her voice still soft but much steadier than it had been an hour earlier. "She's got meetings with investors and board members and people from other companies. I usually just do homework until she's ready to go home." "That sounds like it might get lonely sometimes," Kelvin replied, and the way he phrased the response revealed another layer of professional sophistication. He wasn't leading her toward any particular conclusion or trying to elicit specific information. He was simply creating space for her to express whatever she was feeling without judgment or agenda. "It does get lonely," Saffron admitted, surprised by how easy it felt to be honest with this gentle man. "Everyone here is always so busy and important. I try not to bother anyone, but sometimes I wish I had someone to talk to who wasn't trying to teach me something or fix me or make me better at things." The longing in her voice was palpable, and Kelvin's response demonstrated the kind of emotional intelligence that typically came from extensive training in child development and family therapy. "It sounds like you have a lot of people in your life who care about helping you succeed, but maybe not as many who are focused on helping you just feel comfortable being exactly who you are right now." The insight was remarkably perceptive, cutting through the complexity of Saffron's situation to identify the core issue with surgical precision. Most adults would have responded with platitudes about gratitude or suggestions for making the best of her circumstances. But Kelvin had immediately understood the fundamental problem, that her life was organized around becoming rather than being, around future potential rather than present contentment. "Exactly," Saffron said, her eyes lighting up with the recognition that comes from feeling truly understood. "Everyone talks about what I'm going to do when I grow up, or what colleges I might get into, or what skills I need to develop. But nobody ever asks what I like right now, or what makes me happy, or if I'm okay with how things are. "What do you like right now?" Kelvin asked, settling more comfortably on the lobby floor, as if he had all the time in the world for this conversation. The question was simple but revolutionary in Saffron's experience. An adult asking about her present happiness rather than her future achievements. As she began to answer, describing her love of astronomy and her fascination with ocean creatures, and her secret enjoyment of silly comedy movies that serve no educational purpose whatsoever, Kelvin listened with the kind of focused attention that made her feel like her words mattered. He asked follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine curiosity about her inner world, and he responded to her answers with enthusiasm that felt completely authentic. But perhaps most remarkably, when Saffron mentioned her struggles with the panic attacks and her difficulty sleeping, Kelvin offered suggestions that revealed extensive knowledge of anxiety management techniques. He taught her a breathing exercise that he called balloon breathing, inflating her belly like a balloon on the inhale and slowly deflating it on the exhale. That was actually a sophisticated form of diaphragmatic breathing used in clinical settings for panic disorder treatment. Sometimes when our minds get really busy with worries, it helps to give our bodies something simple and rhythmic to focus on, he explained, demonstrating the technique with practiced ease. The great thing about breathing is that it's always available to us, no matter where we are or what's happening around us. The guidance he offered was remarkably similar to techniques that Dr. Morrison had attempted to teach her, but Kelvin's approach felt completely different. Where the therapist's instructions had felt clinical and prescribed, Kelvin's suggestions felt like gifts shared between friends. He wasn't trying to fix her or treat her condition. He was simply offering tools that might help her feel more comfortable in her own skin. When Saffron mentioned her difficulty with perfectionism, particularly around her music lessons, Kelvin shared a story about his own daughter's struggles with performance anxiety during school presentations. Emma used to get so nervous about making mistakes that she couldn't enjoy the things she was actually good at, he said. We started talking about how mistakes are just information. They tell us something useful about how to do things differently next time, but they don't say anything bad about who we are as people. The refrain was sophisticated and therapeutically sound, the kind of cognitive restructuring that typically required months of professional intervention to achieve. Yet Kelvin offered it casually, wrapped in a personal story that made the wisdom feel accessible and real, rather than theoretical and imposed. As their conversation continued, other aspects of his unusual competence became apparent. He had an intuitive understanding of how to pace their interaction, allowing for comfortable silences when Saffron needed time to process her thoughts. He knew how to validate her emotions without dismissing the legitimate concerns that had triggered them. Most importantly, he seemed to understand the delicate balance between offering support and maintaining her sense of autonomy and dignity. When Saffron's mother's assistant finally called to say that the board meeting was ending, Kelvin helped her gather her belongings with the same respectful attention he had shown throughout their time together. "Would it be okay if I checked in with you when I see you in the lobby?" he asked. "Sometimes it's nice to have someone to say hello to, even if we're both busy with other things." The offer felt like exactly what it was, genuine care from someone who had no agenda beyond her well-being. But for anyone with professional training in mental health, Kelvin's entire approach had revealed depth of knowledge and skill that was completely inconsistent with his role as a maintenance worker. The question wasn't whether he knew how to help someone in crisis. The question was where he had learned such sophisticated techniques, and why someone with his obvious expertise was cleaning floors instead of practicing therapy. As Saffron headed toward the elevator to meet her mother, she felt lighter and more hopeful than she had in months. But she had no idea that the man who had just transformed her evening carried secrets that would soon transform her entire life. Kelvin Albright had once been Dr. Kelvin Michael Albright, one of the most respected child psychologists in the Pacific Northwest, with a thriving practice that specialized in anxiety disorders, trauma recovery, and family therapy. His office at the Meridian Center for Youth Mental Health had been a sanctuary of warm colors and comfortable spaces, where young people and their families found healing through his innovative therapeutic approaches and extraordinary capacity for empathy. For 15 years, Dr. Albright had been at the forefront of pediatric mental health care, developing treatment protocols that were studied and implemented by professionals across the country. His research on anxiety management in high-achieving students had been published in every major psychology journal, and his workshops on family systems therapy consistently drew standing-room-only crowds at national conferences. Colleagues from Harvard and Stanford regularly sought his consultation on their most challenging cases. The transformation from respected psychologist to night shift janitor hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow erosion, like watching a sandcastle dissolve. As wave after wave of tragedy and misfortune crashed over the life he had so carefully built. The first crack in his perfect world had appeared 3 years earlier, when his wife Mered received a devastating diagnosis that would change everything they thought they knew about their future together. Mered O'Brien Albright had been the love of Kelvin's life since their graduate school days at University of Washington, where she was pursuing her doctorate in Irish literature while he studied clinical psychology. She was a third-generation Irish American whose grandmother had immigrated from County Cork in the 1920s, bringing with her not just hopes for a better life, but also a treasure trove of traditional songs and stories that had been passed down through generations of O'Brien women. It was Mered who had taught Kelvin the lullaby that would later comfort Saffron in the Sterling Dynamics lobby. The melody had been in her family for over a century, sung by O'Brien mothers to their babies during the potato famine, through 2 world wars, and across an ocean to the promise of America. Mered's voice had been hauntingly beautiful when she sang it, especially during the early months of their daughter Emma's life, when the ancient words seemed to possess an almost magical power to soothe and heal. The O'Brien family lullaby was more than just a song, it was a sacred trust, passed from mother to daughter with strict instructions about its preservation and protection. Mered had learned it from her grandmother Bridget, who had made her promise to teach it only to her own daughters, to keep the tradition alive while honoring its intimate, family-centered nature. The melody was never to be written down, never recorded, never shared outside the bloodline that had preserved it for generations. When Emma was born, Mered had sung the lullaby every night, her voice creating a bridge between their daughter and the countless O'Brien women who had found comfort in the same words. Kelvin had learned it by heart during those tender bedtime moments, though he understood that as the father, he was a guardian of the tradition rather than its inheritor. The song became part of their family's DNA, woven into their most precious memories and their deepest sense of connection to something larger than themselves. But Mered's aggressive breast cancer had stolen more than just her life. It had also taken Emma's primary connection to her Irish heritage and the musical legacy that should have been passed down to her. At 8 years old, Emma had been too young to fully understand the weight of tradition she was supposed to carry, and in the chaos of grief and adjustment that followed her mother's death, the nightly lullabies had stopped entirely. The medical bills from Mered's treatment had been catastrophic, despite their supposedly comprehensive insurance coverage. Experimental treatments not covered by their plan, specialist consultations, extended hospital stays, and the costs of palliative care had drained their savings and forced Kelvin to take on debt that seemed impossible to repay on a psychologist's salary. He had reduced his patient load to spend more time with Mered during her final months, which meant his practice income plummeted just as their expenses skyrocketed. After Mered's death, Kelvin had tried to maintain his practice while caring for Emma, who had developed selective mutism and severe separation anxiety following her mother's passing. The irony was crushing. He was a renowned expert in treating exactly the kinds of symptoms his own daughter was exhibiting. Yet his grief and overwhelm made it nearly impossible for him to help her effectively. Professional competence meant nothing when personal loss had shattered his ability to maintain the emotional boundaries that effective therapy required. The malpractice lawsuit that destroyed his career had been filed by the parents of a teenage patient who had attempted suicide during a particularly difficult period in her treatment. While the girl had ultimately recovered and gone on to thrive, her parents blamed Dr. Albright for not preventing the crisis, claiming that his methods were experimental and dangerous. The case was eventually dismissed, but not before the legal fees had consumed the remainder of his savings, and the stress had triggered his own breakdown. The State Board of Psychology had placed his license under review during the lawsuit, requiring extensive documentation and review processes that made it impossible for him to see patients or generate income. The review ultimately cleared him of any wrongdoing, but the 18 months of investigation had forced him to close his practice entirely. By the time his license was fully restored, he had lost his office lease, his malpractice insurance had been canceled, and his professional reputation had been severely damaged by the mere existence of the legal proceedings. Starting over at 41, with an 11-year-old daughter struggling with her own mental health challenges, had seemed impossible in the traditional psychology field. The colleagues who had once sought his consultation were suddenly unavailable when he needed references. The universities that had invited him to lecture were no longer interested in his research. The professional networks that had once supported his career advancement had moved on to newer voices and less controversial figures. Emma's needs had been his primary consideration in every decision during this dark period. She required stability, consistency, and emotional availability from her surviving parent, qualities that rebuilding a psychology practice would have made difficult to provide. The night shift position at Aurora Tower had offered exactly what they needed: steady income, health insurance, and a schedule that allowed him to be home when Emma returned from school each day. The application he had submitted to Sterling Dynamics 18 months earlier had been a desperate attempt to find work that utilized his professional skills while meeting their practical needs. The position of Director of Employee Wellness had seemed perfect, developing mental health resources for staff and their families, conducting workshops on stress management and work-life balance, creating support systems for employees dealing with crisis or trauma. His qualifications had been impeccable, his experience directly relevant, and his salary requirements modest for someone of his caliber. What Kelvin hadn't known was that Sterling Dynamics' automated applicant tracking system had been programmed with algorithms that screened out candidates with certain keywords in their background checks. The malpractice lawsuit, despite being dismissed, had created a red flag that automatically moved his application to a rejection pile that human eyes never reviewed. Within 24 hours, an automated email had informed him that his qualifications didn't meet their current needs. While the position ultimately went to someone with half his experience and a quarter of his expertise, the janitorial position had been offered through a different hiring process, one that focused on basic background checks and work history, rather than the nuanced algorithms that governed professional roles. It had been a humbling transition, trading his comfortable office and meaningful therapeutic relationships for cleaning supplies and late-night solitude. Yet Kelvin had discovered unexpected dignity in the honest work, finding peace in the rhythmic nature of his duties and the quiet satisfaction of leaving spaces cleaner than he had found them. More importantly, the job had given him something precious: the opportunity to be fully present for Emma during her healing process. Without the emotional demands of patient care and practice management, he could focus entirely on helping his daughter navigate her grief and rebuild her sense of security. The evening shifts meant he was home every morning when she woke up, available for school pickup, and present for homework help and bedtime routines. It was during one of those bedtime routines, when Emma had been struggling with nightmares and anxiety about losing her remaining parent, that Kelvin had first sung Mayred's lullaby to comfort his daughter. The melody had seemed to carry his wife's presence into the room, creating a bridge between Emma's current grief and her mother's enduring love. The song had become their way of keeping Mayred's memory alive while honoring the O'Brien family. Tradition that Emma would one day carry forward. Now, 18 months into his tenure as Aurora Towers night custodian, Kelvin had developed a routine that allowed him to maintain his dignity while supporting his family. He approached his work with the same attention to detail and care for others that had characterized his therapy practice. When he encountered people in distress, as he occasionally did during late-night encounters with stressed employees or overwhelmed executives, he found ways to offer support that honored his professional training without overstepping the boundaries of his current role. The evening when he had comforted Saffron in the lobby hadn't been the first time his psychological training had been activated by someone in crisis, but it had been the first time he had shared Mayred's lullaby with someone outside his immediate family, a decision that had felt both natural and profound in the moment. Something about Saffron's pain had reminded him of Emma's early struggles with anxiety, and the song had seemed like exactly the right gift to offer a young person who needed to know that she was seen, valued, and deserving of comfort. What Kelvin couldn't have known was that by sharing the O'Brien family lullaby, he had unknowingly created a connection that would transform not just Saffron's evening, but the trajectory of multiple lives. The melody that had comforted generations of Irish women was about to weave together two families that had been separated by circumstance, loss, and the cruel algorithms of modern hiring practices. The man who cleaned floors on the 58th floor of Aurora Tower carried within him the knowledge and experience to heal the very wounds that Sterling Dynamics had been trying unsuccessfully to address through expensive consultants and corporate wellness programs. He possessed the exact combination of professional expertise and personal wisdom that Elora Sterling's family desperately needed, while working invisibly in the same building where that need was most acute. As Kelvin finished his cleaning rounds that evening, humming softly to himself while organizing his supplies, he had no idea that his simple act of kindness was about to expose one of the most profound ironies in corporate history and reunite him with a purpose he had thought was lost forever. Investigation into Kelvin Albright's background began at 3:47 a.m. when Elora Sterling finally returned to her office after ensuring that Saffron was safely home and settled for the night. Unable to sleep or focus on anything else, she had asked her assistant to pull the employment records for every member of the night custodial staff, but particularly the man who had comforted her daughter with impossible knowledge of their family's most sacred tradition. What Marcus Chun, her head of human resources, discovered in the early morning hours would haunt Elora for the rest of her life. The initial background check had revealed basic information. Kelvin Michael Albright, 42 years old, single. Father of an 11-year-old daughter named Emma. 18 months of exemplary service in building maintenance, with no disciplinary actions or performance concerns. But Marcus, sensing the unusual urgency in his CEO's request, had dug deeper into the company's hiring database, searching for any previous interactions between Sterling Dynamics and their night janitor. The discovery had made Marcus physically sick to his stomach. Buried in the rejected applications folder of their talent acquisition system was a file that read like a cosmic joke played by an indifferent universe. Dr. Kelvin Michael Albright, licensed clinical psychologist with 15 years of experience in pediatric mental health, had submitted what might have been the most qualified application Sterling Dynamics had ever received for their Director of Employee Wellness position. His resume had been a masterpiece of relevant experience and innovative thinking. Doctoral degree in clinical psychology from University of Washington, graduating summa cum laude with a dissertation on anxiety management in high-achieving adolescents. 15 years of practice at the Meridian Center for Youth Mental Health, where he had developed therapeutic protocols that were being used by practitioners across the country. Published researcher with over 40 peer-reviewed articles in journals like Child Psychology Review and Family Therapy Quarterly. The cover letter had been thoughtful and specific, demonstrating clear understanding of Sterling Dynamics' corporate culture and mission. Dr. Albright had written eloquently about his vision for comprehensive employee wellness programs that addressed not just physical health, but also the mental and emotional challenges faced by workers in high-pressure environments. He had proposed innovative approaches to supporting employees' families, particularly in managing the unique stresses that came with having parents in demanding executive roles. His references had been stellar: colleagues from Harvard Medical School, former supervisors who described him as the most naturally gifted therapist I've encountered in 30 years of practice, and families whose lives had been transformed by his intervention during their darkest moments. His salary requirements had been remarkably modest for someone of his caliber, motivated more by mission than money in his desire to help others navigate mental health challenges. The application had been perfect in every measurable way. Dr. Kelvin Albright had been exactly what Sterling Dynamics needed, precisely when they needed it most. Elora's own struggles with supporting Saffron's anxiety had been escalating during that same period, and employee surveys had been consistently identifying work-life balance and family stress as major concerns throughout the organization. But Dr. Albright's application had never reached human eyes because of Sterling Dynamics' state-of-the-art applicant tracking system, a $500,000 software package that Elora had personally approved to streamline their hiring process and eliminate human bias from candidate selection. The ATS had been marketed as a revolutionary tool for identifying top talent while reducing the time and resources required for initial screening processes. The system's algorithms had been designed to flag applications containing certain keywords or background elements that might indicate potential legal or financial risks to the company. The dismissed malpractice lawsuit in Dr. Albright's background, despite being completely without merit and ultimately thrown out by the court, had triggered an automatic rejection protocol that moved his application directly to a digital trash bin that no human reviewer ever examined. Within 18 hours of submission, an automated email had been generated, thanking Dr. Albright for his interest and informing him that his qualifications didn't meet Sterling Dynamics' current needs. The message had been sent by a computer program that had never read his cover letter, never reviewed his research, never considered his innovative proposals for employee wellness programming, and never recognized that he possessed exactly the expertise that the company was desperately seeking. The position had ultimately been filled by Dr. Jennifer Morrison, a competent but unremarkable psychologist whose main qualification seemed to be her connection to board member Harrison Vance, who had mentioned her availability during a casual conversation at the Meridian Country Club. Dr. Morrison had lasted 14 months before leaving to join her husband's veterinary practice in Portland, and the employee wellness director position had remained vacant ever since. Marcus had pulled the hiring records with growing horror, documenting a pattern of algorithmic discrimination that had been operating beneath the surface of Sterling Dynamics' recruitment process for over 2 years. The ATS system had systematically eliminated the most qualified candidates while advancing mediocre applicants with better keyword optimization or fewer algorithmic red flags. Dr. Albright had been just one victim of a hiring process that had become so automated and risk-averse that it had lost all connection to actual human judgment and common sense. The mathematics of the situation were devastatingly simple. Sterling Dynamics had rejected the most qualified wellness director candidate they had ever received, then hired someone with a fraction of his experience through nepotism, only to lose that person anyway and leave the critical position unfilled. Meanwhile, the man they had rejected had been forced to take a janitorial position in their own building, where he had been providing exactly the kind of high-quality mental health support they desperately needed, for free, to the CEO's own daughter, while earning minimum wage to empty their trash cans. But the cruel irony went even deeper than professional credentials and missed opportunities. Marcus had continued his investigation into Dr. Albright's background, uncovering the personal tragedy that had necessitated his career transition and the financial circumstances that had forced him to accept work so far beneath his qualifications and expertise. The death of his wife from breast cancer, the medical bills that had bankrupted him despite insurance coverage, the malpractice lawsuit that had been filed by desperate parents looking for someone to blame for their daughter's suicide attempt. All of it painted a picture of a man who had been systematically destroyed by circumstances beyond his control, then rejected by the very organizations that should have recognized his value and expertise. Most heartbreaking of all was the discovery of his late wife's identity and background. Merritt O'Brien Albright had been a descendant of the same county Cork family line that had produced Elora's great-great-grandmother, Bridget O'Brien Sterling. The two women had been distant cousins, separated by geography and generations, but connected by the same bloodline that had preserved the family lullaby for over a century. The song that had so mysteriously comforted Saffron wasn't mysterious at all. It was her own family heritage, carried by a man whose wife had been her cousin, shared in a moment of crisis by someone who had every right to know the melody, but no way of knowing its significance to the Sterling family line. The lullaby had come home through the most unexpected and heartbreaking of circumstances. When Marcus presented his findings to Elora at dawn, spreading the documents across her conference table like evidence of a crime, the scope of the institutional failure felt overwhelming. Sterling Dynamics had created a hiring system so flawed that it had rejected the perfect candidate for their most critical wellness position, then employed that same person in a role that wasted his extraordinary talents while paying him a fraction of what he was worth. The company had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on consulting firms, external wellness programs, and ineffective mental health initiatives, while the solution to their problems swept their floors every evening and occasionally comforted their CEO's daughter during panic attacks that their expensive therapy programs had failed to address. How many other Dr. Albrights have we rejected? Elora asked, her voice hollow with the weight of recognition. How many other perfectly qualified people have we eliminated because our algorithms decided they were risky investments? Marcus had no answer, but the implications were staggering. If Sterling Dynamics' hiring system could miss someone as obviously qualified as Dr. Albright, how many other talented individuals had been systematically excluded from opportunities they deserved? How many innovations had been lost? How many problems had remained unsolved? How many lives had been damaged by the company's misguided attempt to remove human judgment from the hiring process? The algorithmic bias that had rejected Dr. Albright represented everything wrong with corporate decision-making in the digital age: the reduction of human complexity to keyword searches, the prioritization of risk avoidance over talent recognition, and the dangerous assumption that automated systems could replace the nuanced judgment required for evaluating human potential. But beyond the corporate implications, the personal reckoning was even more devastating. Elora's daughter had been suffering from severe anxiety for months, receiving expensive but ineffective treatment from specialists who approached her problems with clinical detachment rather than genuine understanding. The solution to Saffron's struggles had been working in their building all along, possessed by a man whose own tragedy had given him profound empathy for young people in emotional crisis. The distance between Elora's corner office and the lobby floor had never felt more infinite than it did that morning, as she contemplated the impossible coincidence that had brought her cousin's widowed husband into their lives just when they needed him most. The same hiring system that had failed to recognize his professional qualifications had also prevented her from discovering the family connection that might have provided comfort and healing for both their families. As the sun rose over Meridian City, casting long shadows across Sterling Dynamics corporate headquarters, Elora Sterling prepared for what would be the most important conversation of her career, not with investors or board members or business partners, but with a night janitor who possessed the key to healing her daughter's pain and exposing the deepest failures of the empire she had built. The confrontation that would change everything happened on a Thursday evening in the same lobby where Kelvin had first comforted Saffron, but this time the space felt charged with possibility and heavy with the weight of revelation. Elora had dismissed her evening meetings, cleared her calendar, and spent hours rehearsing what she would say to the man who had unknowingly carried her family's legacy into her daughter's life at the moment when it was needed most. She found Kelvin methodically cleaning the windows that overlooked Meridian City's skyline, his movements precise and meditative as he worked with the same attention to detail that had once characterized his approach to therapy. The building was nearly empty at this hour, the corporate energy that usually filled the space replaced by the peaceful quiet that came with evening's arrival. "Mr. Albright," Elora said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of nervousness and determination that surprised them both. "Could I speak with you for a few minutes? About the other evening when you helped my daughter?" Kelvin turned from his cleaning, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to gentle concern as he recognized the woman who commanded the entire building from her corner office, 47 floors above. "Of course, Miss Sterling. I hope Saffron is feeling better. She seemed pretty overwhelmed when I saw her." The casual competence in his response, the way he remembered her daughter's name, the professional terminology he used to describe her condition, the genuine care that colored his voice, confirmed everything that Elora's investigation had revealed about his true identity and qualifications. This wasn't a maintenance worker trying to be helpful. This was a trained psychologist responding to a mental health crisis with the kind of expertise that had once made him one of the most respected practitioners in his field. "She is better, actually," Elora replied, gesturing toward the seating area where Saffron had experienced her breakdown. "Better than she's been in months, thanks to you. But I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me about the answer." Kelvin set down his cleaning supplies and gave her his complete attention, the same focused presence that had made him so effective with both patients and colleagues during his years in practice. "I'll do my best to help however I can." "The song you sang to her," Elora began, her voice catching slightly on the words, "the lullaby, where did you learn it?" Something shifted in Kelvin's expression, a flicker of recognition that suggested he understood this conversation was about more than just his intervention techniques or his informal counseling of a distressed young person. "It was my wife's song," he said carefully. "Something her family had passed down for generations. She used to sing it to our daughter when she was small." "Your wife's family name?" Elora pressed, though she already knew the answer from Marcus's investigation. "Before she married you." "O'Brien," Kelvin said, his voice soft with memory and loss. "Mayred O'Brien. Her grandmother came from County Cork in Ireland, brought the song with her when she immigrated in the 1920s. The confirmation hit Elora like a physical blow, even though she had been expecting it. "Bridget O'Brien was my great-great-grandmother," she whispered. "The same woman who taught that lullaby to my family. We're cousins, Mr. Albright. Distant cousins, but family nonetheless." The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of impossible coincidence and the recognition of connections that ran deeper than either of them had imagined. Kelvin stared at her as the implications began to settle, his professional composure finally cracking as the full scope of what she was telling him became clear. "That's impossible," he said, though his voice carried no conviction. "The song was supposed to stay in the family. Mayred made me promise to teach it only to Emma, to keep the tradition alive but private." "You did keep it in the family," Elora said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Saffron is Emma's cousin, just like Mayred was mine. You gave my daughter exactly what she needed, not just comfort from her anxiety, but a connection to her heritage that I'd failed to provide." The revelation seemed to unlock something in Kelvin, and Alora watched as his professional mask finally slipped completely. "I've been carrying so much guilt about sharing that song with Saffron," he admitted. "I knew it wasn't meant for outsiders, but she seemed so lost, so desperate for comfort. It felt like Mayred was guiding me to sing it like she wanted me to help. She was helping," Alora said firmly. "Both our wives were helping, bringing our families together when we needed each other most." As the family connection settled between them, Alora felt the weight of her next revelation pressing against her chest. "But there's something else, Mr. Albright. Something that's going to be difficult to hear, but that you have a right to know." She pulled out the folder that Marcus had prepared, containing copies of his original application, the ATS rejection notice, and the documentation of how the hiring algorithm had eliminated his candidacy without human review. 18 months ago, you applied for our Director of Employee Wellness position. Kelvin's expression grew guarded. "I remember. I was rejected within a day. The email said my qualifications didn't meet your current needs." "That email was sent by a computer program," Alora said, her voice heavy with shame and anger. "Your application was never seen by a human being. Our applicant tracking system flagged the malpractice lawsuit in your background and automatically rejected you, even though the case was dismissed and you were completely exonerated." She watched as the color drained from his face as the full implications of what she was telling him began to register. "You were the most qualified candidate we've ever received for that position. Your research, your experience, your innovative approaches to family therapy, everything we needed was right there in your application. But our system eliminated you because of an algorithm that was designed to avoid legal risk rather than identify talent." The folder felt heavy in her hands as she passed it to him, watching as he opened it with trembling fingers and began to read his own words back to himself. The cover letter he had crafted so carefully, the research proposals that had never been considered, the salary requirements that had been more than reasonable for someone of his caliber, all of it dismissed by a computer program that had no ability to recognize human worth or professional excellence. "We hired Dr. Morrison instead," Alora continued, forcing herself to tell the complete truth, no matter how painful it was to admit. "She had a fraction of your experience and qualifications, but she had a connection to one of our board members. She left after 14 months, and the position has been vacant ever since." Kelvin closed the folder and looked up at her, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked almost like grief. "So while I've been cleaning your floors for minimum wage, you've had an empty position that I was perfectly qualified to fill. While you've been providing exactly the kind of therapeutic support that we needed," Alora corrected. "You've been doing the job we should have hired you for, just without the recognition or compensation you deserved. You helped my daughter more in one evening than months of expensive therapy had managed to accomplish." The weight of institutional failure and personal tragedy pressed down on both of them as they contemplated the cruel mathematics of missed opportunities and algorithmic bias. The man who should have been leading Sterling Dynamics wellness initiatives had instead been relegated to night custodial work, while the company had struggled with exactly the kinds of problems that his expertise could have solved. "I don't know how to make this right," Alora said finally, her voice breaking with the admission of powerlessness that no CEO wanted to make. "I can't give you back the year and a half you've spent working below your qualifications. I can't undo the financial hardship you've endured or restore the career momentum you lost. But you can give me something more important than any of that," Kelvin said, his voice stronger now as he began to process the full scope of what had been revealed. "You can give me the opportunity to do work that matters again, to use my training and experience to help families like yours, like mine, to honor Mayred's memory by carrying forward the healing that she always believed was possible." The conversation that followed would reshape both of their lives and their families' futures. As the evening deepened around them and the lights of Meridian City twinkled beyond the windows. Two people who had been brought together by tragedy, separated by corporate failures, and reunited by a lullaby began to envision a different kind of future. One where algorithms couldn't override human judgment, where talent was recognized regardless of its current circumstances, and where the healing that both their families needed could finally begin. The changes began slowly, like the first tentative notes of a song that would eventually become a symphony of healing and growth. 3 weeks after their evening conversation in the lobby, Kelvin Albright found himself in a position he had never quite imagined. Director of Employee Wellness and Family Support at Sterling Dynamics, while also maintaining his evening custodial duties by his own choice, a decision that initially puzzled Elora, but would prove to be one of the wisest aspects of their unconventional arrangement. There's dignity in all honest work, Kelvin had explained when Elora suggested he could certainly afford to give up the night shift. And some of my best thinking happens during those quiet hours when I'm moving through the building, observing the spaces where people spend their days. Besides, Emma likes having the run of the office after hours. It's become our special time together, and I'm not ready to give that up. The integration of his dual roles had required creativity and flexibility from everyone involved. Kelvin's office on the 32nd floor was equipped with everything he needed for his wellness director responsibilities: a comfortable counseling space, resources for program development, and technology for virtual sessions with employees and their families. But 3 evenings a week, he still made his rounds with the cleaning cart, now accompanied by Emma, who had become something of a mascot for the night shift crew. The first major transformation had been in Saffron's daily schedule. Though the changes had been implemented gradually to avoid creating new sources of anxiety around the loss of familiar routines, Dr. Morrison's expensive and ineffective sessions had been replaced by weekly meetings with Kelvin. But these felt completely different from traditional therapy. Instead of sitting in a clinical office discussing her problems, Saffron spent time in Kelvin's wellness center learning practical tools for managing anxiety while also engaging in activities that brought her genuine joy. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety entirely, Kelvin had explained to both Saffron and Elora during one of their family sessions. Anxiety can actually be helpful information. It tells us when something needs our attention or when we're pushing ourselves beyond our natural limits. The goal is to develop a healthy relationship with those feelings, so they can guide us rather than overwhelm us. This reframe had been revolutionary for both mother and daughter. Instead of viewing Saffron's panic attacks as failures to be fixed, they began approaching them as signals that her system was overloaded and needed adjustment. The pressure to eliminate all signs of struggle was replaced by curiosity about what those struggles might be trying to communicate. The academic pressure that had been crushing Saffron was restructured around her actual interests and natural learning style rather than arbitrary benchmarks of achievement. The Mandarin lessons with the stern Professor Liu were replaced by weekly sessions with a gentle teacher who incorporated games, music, and cultural exploration into language learning. Instead of memorizing vocabulary words while eating breakfast, Saffron now had leisurely morning conversations with her mother about whatever had captured her imagination the day before. Violin lessons with the perfectionist Maestro Petrosky had been the first activity to go entirely. "I don't actually like playing violin," Saffron had admitted during one of her sessions with Kelvin. "I mean, I like music, but the violin feels like work, not play. I keep doing it because I thought Mom wanted me to be good at everything." The conversation that followed between Elora and her daughter had been one of the most important of their relationship. Sitting on the floor of Kelvin's office while Emma worked on homework nearby, Saffron had explained that many of her activities felt like performances for other people rather than experiences she genuinely enjoyed. The revelation had been heartbreaking for Elora, who realized that her desire to provide opportunities had somehow transformed into pressure to excel at everything. "What do you actually want to try?" Elora had asked, the question feeling strange in her mouth because she couldn't remember the last time she had asked her daughter about her authentic preferences rather than her achievement goals. Saffron's answer had surprised everyone. I want to learn about marine biology. And maybe take art classes where I don't have to be good at it, just where I can make things. And I want to spend time with Emma, because she's the first friend I've had who likes me for who I am instead of being impressed by my schedule. Friendship between Saffron and Emma had been one of the most natural and healing aspects of the entire transformation. Despite their 2-year age difference, the girls had connected over their shared experiences of anxiety, loss, and the pressure to be more resilient than their young hearts were ready to handle. Emma's selective mutism had been gradually improving through her father's gentle support, and she found her voice most easily when talking with Saffron about topics that genuinely interested them both. Their friendship had begun during Emma's after-school visits to Sterling Dynamics, when she would arrive with her father for his evening transition between his wellness director duties and his custodial rounds. The girls had discovered a shared fascination with ocean creatures and marine ecosystems, spending hours researching deep-sea animals and planning imaginary underwater expeditions. They balance each other beautifully, Kelvin had observed too. Elora during one of their weekly check-ins. Emma helps Saffron understand that it's okay to be quiet and thoughtful, that you don't have to perform constantly to be worthy of love. And Saffron helps Emma remember that her voice matters, that sharing her thoughts and feelings can bring joy to other people. The transformation extended beyond just the girls to include fundamental changes in how Sterling Dynamics approached employee wellness and family support. Kelvin's professional expertise had quickly revealed that Saffron's struggles were not unique. The company's high-pressure culture was creating similar challenges for employees' families throughout the organization. The first initiative he had developed was the Family Transition Support Program, designed to help employees navigate major life changes like divorce, relocation, or career transitions while minimizing the impact on their children. The program included counseling resources, peer support groups, and practical assistance with everything from finding new schools to managing custody arrangements. Corporate success doesn't happen in a vacuum, Kelvin had explained to the board during his first quarterly presentation. When employees are worried about their family's well-being, when their children are struggling with anxiety or behavioral issues, it affects every aspect of their professional performance. Supporting the whole family system isn't just the right thing to do, it's also good business. The anxiety and stress management workshops that Kelvin developed had quickly become some of the most popular offerings in Sterling Dynamics' wellness program. Rather than focusing only on adult stress management, these sessions included age-appropriate resources for children and teenagers, teaching entire families how to recognize and respond to anxiety in healthy ways. But perhaps the most innovative program had been the Intergenerational Mentorship Initiative, which paired Sterling Dynamics employees with young people in the community who were interested in learning about various career paths. The program served dual purposes, providing meaningful guidance to young people while giving employees opportunities to share their knowledge and experience in ways that felt personally fulfilling. Elora herself had become one of the most enthusiastic participants in this program, discovering that she genuinely enjoyed talking with teenagers about entrepreneurship and leadership when the conversations were focused on exploration rather than achievement. Her sessions with the mentorship group had reminded her of why she had started Sterling Dynamics in the first place, not just to build wealth, but to create solutions that could improve people's lives. The changes in Elora's own approach to work and family had been perhaps the most challenging aspect of the transformation process. Learning to prioritize presence over productivity, to value connection over control, required her to fundamentally rewire patterns of thinking and behavior that had been developing for decades. I keep catching myself checking email during conversations with Saffron, she had admitted to Kelvin during one of their sessions. Even when I'm trying to be present, part of my brain is always planning the next meeting or thinking about the next problem that needs solving. That's completely normal, Kelvin had reassured her. Those patterns developed for good reasons. They helped you build something extraordinary and provide security for your family. We're not trying to eliminate your drive or your professional competence. We're just trying to create some boundaries around when those qualities are most helpful and when they might be getting in the way of other important goals. The practical strategies that Kelvin had developed for Elora included designated phone-free time during family meals, regular mother-daughter activities that had nothing to do with productivity or achievement, and weekly reflection sessions where she could process the emotional aspects of leadership that she had previously ignored or suppressed. One of the most meaningful changes had been the institution of Wonder Wednesdays, weekly evening adventures where Elora and Saffron explored something purely for the joy of discovery. They had visited the Meridian Aquarium to watch jellyfish float in illuminated tanks, taken astronomy classes at the local planetarium, and spent hours at the beach collecting shells and building sandcastles without any educational objectives or performance goals. I had forgotten what Saffron's laugh sounded like when she wasn't trying to impress anyone, Elora had reflected after one of their adventures. I had forgotten what my own laugh sounded like, for that matter. The workplace culture at Sterling Dynamics had also begun to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. The bubble breaks that had started as a whimsical experiment, 15-minute periods when employees could step away from their desks to engage in purely joyful, non-productive activities, had evolved into a broader recognition that creativity and innovation required space for play and mental rest. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements in work-life balance scores, stress management, and overall job satisfaction. Productivity had actually increased rather than decreased, supporting Kelvin's theory that supporting whole person wellness ultimately benefited professional performance as well. The most surprising development had been the emergence of employee-led initiatives that reflected the values Kelvin had introduced through his programs. A group of working parents had started a monthly family integration day, where employees could bring their children to the office for structured activities that helped kids understand their parents' work while giving families more time together. Legal department had initially worried about liability issues, and some executives had questioned the professional appropriateness of having children in the workplace. But the program had been such a success, with children asking thoughtful questions about technology and innovation, employees feeling more energized and creative after spending time with young people, and families developing stronger connections to the Sterling Dynamics community, that it had become a permanent offering. You know what I've realized? Elora had told Kelvin during one of their evening conversations, watching as Saffron and Emma collaborated on a marine biology presentation, that no teacher had assigned, but that both girls were passionately excited about. I spent so much energy trying to prepare Saffron for an uncertain future that I forgot to help her enjoy her very certain present. The relationship between Kelvin and Elora had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a professional partnership built on shared values and complementary expertise, but also a deep personal friendship rooted in their shared commitment to healing their families and honoring the memory of those they had lost. Mayred would have loved seeing our girls together like this, Kelvin had said one evening as they watched Saffron and Emma rehearse a song they had written about ocean conservation. She always believed that the best healing happened in community, that we were meant to support each other through the difficult seasons. I think both our wives would be proud of what we've built here, Elora had replied. Not just the programs or the policy changes, but the recognition that success without connection isn't really success at all. The financial aspects of Kelvin's transition had been handled with sensitivity and creativity. His salary as Director of Employee Wellness reflected his qualifications and the value he brought to the organization, but Elora had also quietly established a fund to help offset the financial losses he had endured during his years of career transition. More importantly, she had used Sterling Dynamics resources to advocate for other professionals who had been unfairly impacted by algorithmic bias or systemic discrimination. "We can't change what happened to you," she had told him, "but we can work to ensure it doesn't happen to others. And we can use what we've learned to build better systems that recognize human potential, regardless of current circumstances." The Sterling Foundation's new initiative for algorithmic justice had become one of Alora's most personally meaningful projects, working with other organizations to identify and address bias in hiring systems, lending practices, and other automated decision-making processes that affected people's opportunities and life outcomes. But for all the systemic changes and professional accomplishments, the most important transformation had been the gradual healing of two families who had been carrying grief, anxiety, and isolation without realizing how much they needed each other. The evening rituals that had developed naturally over the months, shared dinners when Kelvin's schedule allowed, collaborative homework sessions where Emma and Saffron supported each other's learning, and regular family meetings where both girls felt comfortable expressing their thoughts and feelings, had created the kind of chosen family bonds that transcended traditional categories of relationship. "We're like a constellation," Saffron had said one evening, using a metaphor she had learned in her astronomy class. "Different stars that look separate from far away, but that actually form something beautiful when you see how they connect." The transformation was ongoing rather than complete, with new challenges and discoveries emerging regularly as both families continued to grow and heal. But the foundation they had built together, based on authentic connection rather than performative success, on presence rather than productivity, on honoring both grief and joy as essential parts of the human experience, provided the stability and support that made continued growth possible. As autumn arrived in Meridian City, painting the corporate landscape in shades of gold and amber, the changes that had begun with a lullaby in a corporate lobby had rippled outward to touch dozens of families, transform organizational culture, and create new models for what success could look like when it prioritized human flourishing alongside financial achievement. The man who had once cleaned floors while carrying the knowledge to heal hearts had become a bridge between worlds, honoring both the dignity of humble work and the importance of professional expertise, both the value of individual achievement and the necessity of community support. And in doing so, he had helped create something rare and precious, a workplace that felt like family, and a family that felt strong enough to face whatever challenges the future might bring. 1 year and 3 months after a maintenance worker had hummed a lullaby to calm a crying girl in a corporate lobby, the Aurora Tower's 58th floor had been transformed into something that defied traditional corporate conventions. It was 6:30 on a Thursday evening, and what should have been the usual post-business hours quiet was instead filled with the gentle sounds of families gathering for the monthly community circle that had become one of Sterling Dynamics' most cherished traditions. Saffron Hayes, now 10.5 years old, sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor of the main conference room, carefully arranging marine biology books and hand-drawn charts for the presentation she and Emma would be giving to the assembled group. Her anxiety hadn't disappeared entirely, it probably never would, but it had transformed from a crushing weight into something more manageable, like weather that she had learned to dress for appropriately. "I still get nervous before presentations," she had explained to the group of younger children who looked up to her as a mentor. "But now I know that being nervous doesn't mean I can't do something. It just means my body is getting ready to do something important." The difference was remarkable. To anyone who had known her during her darkest period, where there had once been rigid perfectionism and paralyzing fear of failure, there was now a calm confidence that came from knowing she was valued for who she was, rather than what she achieved. The panic attacks still occurred occasionally, usually during times of significant change or stress, but they no longer felt like evidence of personal failure or signs that her entire world was falling apart. Emma Albright, now 12 and blossoming into a thoughtful young person, with a quiet strength that reminded everyone of her father, was setting up the projector with the kind of technical competence that would have impressed the Sterling Dynamics IT department. Her selective mutism had evolved into a preference for careful, intentional communication rather than an inability to speak. When she did talk, people listened, because her words carried the weight of genuine thought and feeling. Emma taught me that you don't have to fill every silence with words. Saffron often told people who asked about their friendship. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in the quiet spaces between talking. The friendship between the two girls had become the emotional center on which both families had reorganized their lives. It wasn't the scheduled, activity-driven relationship that many children of high-achieving parents experienced, but something more organic and mutual. They supported each other through difficult moments, celebrated each other's victories, and created the kind of shared adventures that would become treasured memories decades later. Tonight's presentation was about ocean conservation, a topic they had become passionate about after visiting the Meridian Marine Research Center as part of one of their Wonder Wednesday adventures. But unlike the academic performances that had once dominated Saffron's schedule, this presentation was driven by genuine enthusiasm rather than external expectations. They weren't trying to impress anyone or earn any grades, they simply wanted to share something they cared about with people they loved. Kelvin moved quietly through the room, helping families set up their contributions to the evening's potluck dinner while maintaining the same attentive presence that had characterized both his therapeutic work and his custodial duties. At 43, he had found a professional rhythm that honored all aspects of his identity: the trained psychologist, the dedicated father, the man who found dignity in honest work regardless of its status or complexity. His dual role at Sterling Dynamics had initially raised eyebrows among some traditional business circles, but the results spoke for themselves. Employee satisfaction scores had reached historic highs, turnover had decreased significantly, and the company's reputation as a family-friendly workplace had begun attracting top talent, who prioritized work-life integration over pure salary maximization. People thought I was crazy for keeping the custodial work, Kelvin had told a reporter who was writing an article about innovative approaches to employee wellness. But those evening hours give me insights into how our workplace actually functions that I could never get from formal meetings or structured sessions. When you see how people behave when they think no one is watching, you understand what they really need to thrive. The community circles had emerged naturally from the family integration programs that Kelvin had developed, but they had evolved into something more significant than anyone had originally envisioned. Once a month, Sterling Dynamics employees and their families gathered to share updates about their lives, celebrate achievements, support each other through challenges, and simply enjoy the kind of intergenerational community that was increasingly rare in modern professional environments. Tonight's gathering included 3 families who were navigating divorce, 2 families dealing with elderly parents who needed increased care, 1 family celebrating a teenager's acceptance to art school, and several families who simply enjoyed the opportunity to connect with others who understood the unique challenges of high-pressure professional environments. ELOR arrived at the community circle directly from a board meeting with international investors, but instead of the rushed, distracted energy that had once characterized her transitions between work and family time, she moved with intentional presence. Learning to be fully where she was, when she was there, had been one of the most challenging but rewarding aspects of her personal transformation. The greatest leadership challenge I've ever faced, she had told a gathering of CEO peers, wasn't expanding into international markets or managing hostile takeover attempts. It was learning to be present with my daughter when she needed me most. The changes in Alora's approach to leadership had rippled throughout Sterling dynamics in ways that continued to surprise and inspire her. When she had begun modeling work-life integration rather than just talking about it, leaving meetings early to attend Saffron's art shows, taking actual vacation time, acknowledging her own struggles with anxiety and perfectionism, it had given permission for other employees to prioritize their own well-being and family relationships. The company's productivity hadn't suffered. If anything, it had improved as people became more creative, more collaborative, and more committed to their work when they felt supported as whole human beings rather than just professional resources. The Sterling Dynamics culture had become something unique in the corporate world, a place where excellence was pursued without sacrificing humanity, where success was measured not just in financial terms, but in the flourishing of everyone connected to the organization. As families settled into the comfortable circle of chairs and floor cushions that had been arranged for the evening, Saffron and Emma stood to begin their presentation. The easy confidence with which they addressed the mixed age group reflected months of practice in environments where their voices were valued and their perspectives were genuinely welcomed. "We want to tell you about something that's been really important to us this year," Saffron began, her voice clear and strong. "The ocean is in trouble, and we think there are things we can do to help, even from here in Meridian City." Emma stepped forward, her contribution measured and thoughtful. "As always, we've learned that small actions by lots of people can create big changes. Like how drops of water eventually carve canyons, or how individual voices can join together to create something powerful enough to be heard by people who make important decisions." The presentation that followed was both informative and inspiring. But what impressed the adults most was the girls' collaborative dynamic. They had learned to complement each other's strengths. Saffron's enthusiasm and communication skills, balanced by Emma's research abilities and analytical thinking. Their friendship had taught them both that they didn't have to be good at everything. They just had to be willing to work together with people who had different gifts. The Ocean Conservation Project had become more than just a school assignment or personal interest. Working with Kelvin's guidance, the girls had developed a proposal for Sterling Dynamics to partner with marine research organizations, using the company's technological resources to support conservation efforts while providing employees' families with opportunities to engage in meaningful environmental work. "We're not asking for a lot of money," Emma explained to the group. "We're asking for connections and expertise. Sterling Dynamics has relationships with technology companies that could help scientists track ocean health, and employees here have skills that could be really useful for conservation organizations that don't have big budgets for technical support." The proposal represented exactly the kind of thinking that Kelvin had been encouraging throughout his wellness programs. The recognition that personal fulfillment and professional competence could be aligned in service of purposes larger than individual achievement. When people felt connected to meaningful work that reflected their values, they brought more creativity and commitment to all aspects of their lives. After the presentation, as families shared dinner and conversation in small groups throughout the conference room, Kelvin found himself in a corner with several other parents, discussing the challenges and joys of raising children in an achievement-oriented culture. The conversations were frank and supportive, touching on everything from social media pressures to college admission, anxiety to the difficulty of modeling healthy relationships with work and success. "The hardest thing for me," admitted Patricia Vance, whose teenage son had been struggling with depression despite his academic achievements, "is accepting that I can't optimize my way out of every problem. Some things just take time and patience, and being willing to sit with difficulty instead of immediately trying to fix it. That's been my biggest lesson too," Elora added, watching as Saffron and Emma worked together to clean up their presentation materials. "I spent so much energy trying to engineer the perfect childhood for Saffron that I almost missed the actual child who was right in front of me." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of gentle humming from across the room, where several of the younger children had gathered around Emma, who was comforting a 4-year-old whose parents were going through a difficult divorce. The melody was instantly recognizable to both Elora and Kelvin, the O'Brien family lullaby that had started this entire journey of healing and discovery. "Hush now, my darling, close weary eyes," Emma sang softly, her voice carrying the same warmth and care that her father had used to comfort Saffron over a year earlier. "Stars in the heavens are dancing tonight. Tonight." The sight of Emma sharing the family lullaby with another child in need brought tears to both Kelvin and Elora's eyes. The song had traveled across generations and oceans, through tragedy and loss, finally finding its way to a corporate conference room where it served its original purpose, offering comfort to vulnerable souls who needed to know they were seen, valued, and loved. "She's been teaching it to the other kids," Kelvin explained quietly to Elora. "Not performing it or showing off, but sharing it when someone needs extra comfort. Just like Mayrid would have wanted." The lullaby had become more than just a family tradition. It had become a symbol of the kind of healing that was possible when people were willing to share their gifts generously, to recognize the humanity in unexpected places, and to trust that connection could bridge even the most unlikely circumstances. As the evening began to wind down and families started gathering their belongings, Saffron approached her mother with the kind of direct communication that had become characteristic of their transformed relationship. "Mom, I've been thinking about something," she said, settling into the chair beside Elora. "I want to do something special for Kelvin and Emma, something that shows how grateful we are for everything they've helped us learn." "What did you have in mind?" Elora asked, giving her daughter the same focused attention she would have offered to a major investor. "I want to create a scholarship fund," Saffron said, her words carefully chosen but delivered with confident conviction. "For kids whose parents have the right qualifications for jobs, but can't get hired because of unfair computer programs or other kinds of discrimination. Kids like Emma, who might have to worry about money because their parents got treated unfairly." The proposal was sophisticated and thoughtful, reflecting not just Saffron's growing understanding of social justice issues, but also her deep appreciation for how systemic failures had affected people she cared about. It was exactly the kind of initiative that Elora would have loved to support, but more importantly, it represented Saffron's evolution from a child who consumed opportunities to a young person who wanted to create them for others. "I think that's a beautiful idea," Elora replied. "And I think it would mean a lot to Kelvin and Emma to know that their story could help other families facing similar challenges." As families began to leave, exchanging hugs and making plans for the following month's gathering, Kelvin found himself alone with Elora in the conference room that had hosted so many of their important conversations. The space felt peaceful in the aftermath of community, filled with the residual warmth of genuine connection and shared purpose. "You know what strikes me most about all of this?" Elora said, gesturing toward the remnants of the evening. The children's artwork still taped to the walls, the empty chairs arranged in their welcoming circle, the sense of belonging that lingered in the air. A year ago, this building felt like a monument to individual achievement. Now it feels like a celebration of what's possible when people support each other. "That's the thing about healing," Kelvin replied, beginning the familiar routine of stacking chairs and organizing the space for the next day's business activities. "It's not really an individual process. We heal in relationship, in community, through the recognition that our struggles and our strengths are connected to something larger than ourselves." The truth of his words had been demonstrated repeatedly throughout the year, not just in their own families, but in the dozens of other families who had been touched by the programs and culture they had created together. The employee whose marriage had been saved through family counseling resources. The teenager whose anxiety had improved through peer support groups. The single parent who had been able to advance professionally because of the company's new flexible work policies. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if that night had gone differently, Elora mused. If I hadn't been watching the security cameras, if you hadn't decided to help Saffron, if we'd never discovered the connection between our families. I don't think it was really about that one night, Kelvin said thoughtfully. I think all of this was always waiting to happen. The need was there, the potential was there, the willingness to change was there. Sometimes it just takes the right moment for people to see what was already possible. The conversation was interrupted by Saffron and Emma, who had finished their cleanup duties and were ready to head home. The easy familiarity between the four of them, the way they moved around each other with affection and respect, the comfortable silences and shared jokes, the mutual support that flowed naturally in all directions, reflected the kind of chosen family bonds that had become the foundation of their new life together. As they walked toward the elevator together, Saffron began humming the O'Brien lullaby, her voice blending with Emma's in harmonies that seemed to echo through the halls of Aurora Tower, the melody that had once been sung by Irish mothers during the potato famine, that had comforted children through 2 world wars, that had traveled across an ocean to find new life in America, was now being carried forward by 2 young girls who understood both its power and its responsibility. Dreams will come calling like soft summer rain, they sang together, their voices floating through the corporate corridors like a reminder that even the most professional spaces could be transformed by the simple recognition that every person deserved to be seen, valued, and loved. The story didn't end with perfect healing or complete transformation, because real life rarely offers such tidy resolutions. Saffron continued to experience anxiety during times of high stress. Emma still carried the quiet sadness of someone who had lost her mother too young. Elora struggled with the ongoing tension between professional demands and personal presence. Kelvin remained a single father rebuilding a career while honoring his daughter's emotional needs, but they had learned something invaluable about the nature of resilience and the power of authentic connection. They had discovered that healing doesn't require perfection, only presence. That success without humanity isn't really success at all. That sometimes the most important help comes from the most unexpected places. Like a night janitor with a doctorate in psychology and a heart full of songs that could comfort frightened children. Most importantly, they had learned that every person carries hidden depths of knowledge, experience, and wisdom that can't be captured by job titles, salary levels, or algorithmic assessments. The man who cleaned floors might also be the person who could heal hearts. The anxious child might also be the visionary who could change the world. The successful executive might also be the broken parent who needed to learn how to simply be present with love. In a world that too often judged people by their current circumstances rather than their potential contributions, their story had become a reminder that worth is inherent rather than earned, that dignity belongs to all honest work, and that the most profound transformations often begin with simple acts of kindness offered by people who are willing to see beyond surface appearances to the humanity beneath. The lullaby that had brought them together would continue to be sung, passed down to new generations who would face their own challenges and discover their own ways of healing and growing together. And in conference rooms and custodial closets, in corner offices and community circles, the recognition would continue to spread that every voice matters, every story has value, and every person deserves to be heard, seen, and loved for exactly who they are. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, 5 years after a maintenance worker had first hummed a lullaby to calm a crying girl in the Aurora Tower lobby. Dr. Kelvin Albright, now Director of Global Wellness Initiatives at Sterling Dynamics, was reviewing applications for the company's annual Hidden Potential Scholarship program when his assistant knocked on his office door with an envelope marked personal and confidential. Inside was a handwritten letter on university letterhead, accompanied by a photograph that made his breath catch in his throat. The image showed a young woman in a graduation cap and gown, standing beside what was clearly a research vessel, her smile radiating, the kind of confidence that comes from pursuing work that aligns perfectly with one's deepest passions. Dear Dr. Albright, the letter began in familiar handwriting, though the words were shaped by a maturity that 5 years of growth had brought. I wanted you to be among the first to know that I graduated yesterday with my Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology, with highest honors and a specialty in ocean conservation. Emma says I should tell you that my thesis on microplastic reduction strategies has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Marine Environmental Science. Pretty exciting for someone who used to have panic attacks about violin recitals. Saffron Hayes, now 20 and finishing her junior year at the University of Washington's prestigious School of Oceanography, had become exactly the kind of person her younger self had dreamed of being but had never dared to believe was possible. The frightened 9-year-old who had once sat crying in corporate lobbies had evolved into a confident young scientist whose research was already making meaningful contributions to environmental conservation efforts. The scholarship fund we started when I was 10 has now supported 43 students whose families faced employment discrimination, the letter continued. But more importantly, the Sterling Foundation's Algorithmic Justice Initiative has helped change hiring practices at over 200 companies across the country. We've estimated that more than 3,000 qualified candidates, who might have been unfairly rejected, have found meaningful employment because of the advocacy work that grew out of our story. The ripple effects of their transformation had indeed spread far beyond their original family circle. The Harvard Business Review had published a case study about Sterling Dynamics' approach to employee wellness and family integration. TED Talks had been given about the dangers of algorithmic bias in hiring. Documentary filmmakers had created award-winning films about the hidden costs of corporate success culture on children's mental health. But perhaps most meaningfully, the community circle model that had emerged from their monthly gatherings had been adopted by dozens of organizations across the country. Schools, hospitals, law firms, and tech companies had all discovered that creating regular opportunities for employees and their families to connect authentically led to improved productivity, reduced turnover, and higher levels of both professional and personal satisfaction. Emma is finishing her master's degree in art therapy at NYU, Saffron's letter continued, updating Kelvin on the daughter he was so proud of. She's specializing in using creative expression to help children process grief and trauma. Her thesis project involves teaching art therapy techniques to other young people who have lost parents, creating peer support networks that she says are more effective than traditional adult-led interventions. She still sings Grandma Maired's lullaby to the kids she works with. It's become part of her therapeutic toolkit. Emma's evolution from a selectively mute 8-year-old to a confident graduate student working to help other children navigate loss represented one of the most profound transformations of their entire journey. Her artistic talent, which had been nurtured rather than pressured during her healing process, had become the foundation for meaningful work that honored both her mother's memory and her father's therapeutic legacy. Mom asks me to tell you that the Sterling Foundation's partnership with marine research organizations has now funded 17 conservation projects around the world, the letter went on. The technology platforms that Sterling Dynamics developed for tracking ocean health are being used by scientists in 43 countries. She says that learning to align our professional capabilities with our personal values has been the most rewarding business strategy she's ever implemented. Elora Sterling, now a sought-after speaker on conscious leadership and corporate responsibility, had discovered that building a company culture based on authentic human connection hadn't just improved employee satisfaction, it had also attracted top talent, increased innovation, and generated higher long-term profits than traditional high-pressure approaches. The Sterling Dynamics model was being studied and replicated by business schools and management consultants worldwide. But the thing I'm most grateful for Saffron's letter concluded, is that you and Mom taught me that anxiety doesn't have to be a limitation. It can be information that helps us make better choices about how we want to live. I still get nervous before big presentations, or when I'm scuba diving in new locations for research projects. But now I know that feeling scared and being brave aren't opposites, they're dance partners. The photograph that accompanied the letter showed not just Saffron's graduation, but also the chosen family that had grown from their original healing circle. Emma stood beside her, having flown across the country to celebrate her chosen sister's achievement. Elora was there, beaming with pride at her daughter's accomplishments. And in the background, visible through the research vessel's windows, was the vast ocean that had become Saffron's passion and life's work. As Kelvin finished reading, he felt the same sense of wonder that had characterized so many moments over the past 5 years. The frightened little girl who had needed a lullaby to calm her panic attacks had become a young woman whose research was helping to heal the planet's waters. The successful but disconnected CEO who had watched her daughter's breakdown from 47 floors above had become a leader whose approach to business was transforming corporate culture across industries. That evening, as he had done every evening for the past 5 years, Kelvin made his rounds through Aurora Tower's floors though. Now his custodial duties were voluntary rather than necessary for survival. He had discovered that the quiet, meditative nature of cleaning work provided him with insights and perspectives that informed his wellness programs, and he had never felt compelled to abandon the practice entirely. In the lobby where everything had begun, he found a new scene that had become increasingly common. A Sterling Dynamics employee sitting quietly with her 6-year-old son, who was dealing with his parents' recent divorce. The woman, a talented software engineer named Lisa, had been attending the company's family support groups and had learned to recognize when her son needed extra comfort rather than distraction. "Would you like me to sing you something, my friend?" "Taught me?" Lisa was asking her son softly. "It's a very old song that's helped a lot of kids feel better when they're sad or scared." As her gentle voice began the familiar melody, "Hush now, my darling. Close weary eyes." Kelvin smiled and continued his quiet work, understanding that the lullaby he had shared with one frightened girl had now become part of a healing tradition that would continue long after he was gone. The song had found new voices, new hearts to comfort, new families to bring together. It had become exactly what Mayred had always intended it to be, a bridge between generations, a reminder that love persists through the darkest times, and a testament to the healing power of simple human kindness offered generously to those who need it most. Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, a young marine biologist was probably falling asleep to the sound of waves against her research vessel, dreaming of the discoveries that would help heal the waters she loved so much. Somewhere in New York City, a graduate student was probably singing that same lullaby to children who had lost their parents too young, helping them understand that grief and hope could coexist in the same heart. And in corporate offices around the world, people were learning to see beyond job titles and salary levels to recognize the hidden depths of wisdom, experience, and compassion that every person carries within them, waiting for someone brave enough to look past surface appearances to the humanity beneath. The man who had once been rejected by algorithms and overlooked by systems was now helping to build a world where every person's worth could be recognized, where every family's struggles could be supported, and where every child could grow up knowing that they were valued for exactly who they were, rather than who they might become. The lullaby continued, as it always had and always would, carrying love across the distances that seemed to separate us, reminding us that we are all connected by the simple truth that everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and loved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.